Story 1. It wouldn't. We would struggle significantly to exist without the resources that a government and modern society provide. We would begin forming some type of governance almost immediately. It wouldn't be as effective, but something would emerge. Story 2. Anarchist ideologies generally do not advocate for the removal of all systems that might be described as government. They argue that states are illegitimate. States are a specific focus in their critique and do not include all forms of association or representation. In general, their ideal would be a mostly flat hierarchy and decentralized direct democracy. Instead of electing a president with executive authority, no such role would exist. People or councils would only be temporarily empowered to fulfill small portions of the numerous responsibilities typically assigned to a president. However, it is important to note that anarchists are rarely practical anarchists. Anarchism is closer to a state of philosophical critique than a policy proposal. Many anarchists use it to critique power structures rather than as a principle they actively pursue. It serves as an ideal that demonstrates that states and hierarchy are not natural or healthy environments for human flourishing. Their goals generally include pushing against centralized, authoritarian power and advocating for greater degrees of democracy and social freedom. It is not as irrational as people might think. States are a relatively recent development for humans, and we functioned without anything resembling them for most of our history. They appear to stem from the idea that one person can own the product of another's work. Story 3. History has examples of this. Governments have collapsed or been wiped out in war, leading people to fight over the remnants. Gang leaders became warlords and then kings, bringing us back to a form of government. The only way we could exist without a government is if it were a deliberate move toward that end for decades, at least, and even then I have serious doubts. There will always be individuals who desire more and choose to take it from others, ultimately becoming dictators or prompting the formation of a government to resist them. Story 4. Companies would grow large enough to purchase armies, conquer territories, and establish their own kingdoms, similar to the Dutch East India Company. Story 5. As soon as people organize themselves, it is government. There is no such thing as a society without some form of government. It is simply a matter of terminology. Story 6. It wouldn't function except in isolated pockets of civility. Overall, most people would turn feral and fight over territory, resources, and domination as usual, all while wearing a rabbit as underwear. Story 7. Remember a few years ago when Texas experienced a severe freeze and ice storm, resulting in individuals receiving electric bills of $10,000 due to the lack of government regulation on utility companies. In such disasters, the price of gasoline could skyrocket to $1,000 per gallon, and a gallon of fresh water could cost $2,000. People underestimate how difficult situations can reveal the true nature of individuals. Story 8. This should give you an idea of what libertarians think on this subject. Story 9. It would likely devolve into the notion that might makes right. If you can protect yourself, you thrive. If you cannot, you do not. Story 10. It would simply not. As soon as humans start to work together, a government would form. It would be different from the current ones, but it would still be a government. Story 11. Because we would all trust each other to do the right thing to provide for the community. If there are those who do not abide by this or refuse to, we threaten to expel them by gossiping about them, excluding them from activities, and refusing to interact with them. At least that is the theory of how human society operated before the development of agriculture. Agriculture changed human society by such a large margin that this form of society seems impossible at our current stage of development. There were far fewer people before agriculture. Story 12. Organization is part of the natural human condition. Eventually, someone will instruct you on what to do, and that instruction may end up harming someone else. This is the essence of government. Story 13. There would be no society in the way you are using the word. Society implies unity, and no government implies anarchy. Society, as we know it, would devolve into tribalism based on family clans. Story 14. There have been plenty of books written about this. The only one I've read is The Machinery of Freedom by David Friedman, an anarcho-capitalist. Note that most anarchists don't consider anarcho-capitalists to be real anarchists. He is a thoughtful individual and does not shy away from discussing tough problems, such as national defense, but I remain unconvinced. You might find Ursula K. Le Guin's science fiction book, The Dispossessed, interesting. She describes an anarchist utopia and provides some technical details. On the classical anarchist side, perhaps Peter Gelderlo's Anarchy Works is worth exploring, as it is also freely available. I haven't read it, but I have seen it recommended. You often encounter a great deal of idealistic claims such as people will naturally behave in way X because of the logic of Y and will thus achieve Z, and a world without coercion by the state will bring joy throughout the land. But not so much Steve goes to your house and punches you in the nose. What happens next? Story 15. That's kind of a trick question. In theory, the job of government is to pass laws and regulations that ideally codify, uphold, and enforce the rules a society agrees to and relies upon in order to function. So if you remove government, you are, again in theory, removing the institution that implements the agreements upon which society is based in the first place. Many anarchists believe that there is no need for such an institution. I am oversimplifying here, but the thought is that human nature and thought are the original, true sources of the rules that govern society. As such, codifying the rules and establishing an institution, such as a government, to uphold them is unnecessary, as that institution is already found within each of us. In an anarchistic society, citizens act on behalf of this institution through exercising free will. Under the freedom of anarchy, each person becomes their own sovereign nation. They alone are empowered with the ability to govern themselves and will inherently determine and initiate those actions that best represent their self-interests. In short, everyone looking out for themselves best ensures that everyone's interests are equally represented. No gods. No masters. The problem, among many, is that this requires all humans at all times to behave in a logical, rational, and fully informed manner. It ignores our tendencies to engage in behaviors that are both destructive to ourselves and those around us, which is precisely what law and therefore government is meant to regulate. Story 16. We need a government, but not a corrupt one. However, that may be too much to ask in a capitalist society. Story 17. People form groups and make non-binding agreements with each other, while a few individuals who want to take charge may impose their wishes on others. Story 18. The only way is for humans to become kind and not selfish. I agree completely. Without structures to counter selfishness, society collapses into chaos. Even if most people are decent, it only takes a few bad actors to exploit that decency. We have seen it in real life. The libertarian experiment in Maine failed because humans are not solitary animals. We need cooperation, not just individualism. Governments are not perfect, but they are the only way to enforce the rules that keep greed and exploitation in check. Otherwise, it is just warlords or billionaires with private armies calling the shots. Story 19. People do not appreciate the fragility of things like infrastructure or any of the essential services we all need to live. Yet no one wants to spend money on them because they are not entertaining. Those who claim they do not want government probably believe that wealthy individuals in their society would assume responsibility for building roads, not realizing that even in the best-case scenario, this would only result in roads connecting their own points of interest, not necessarily others. How would you collect taxes without authority? How do you fund essential services like sanitation without resources? If the current climate is any indicator, people are often unwilling to donate unless they can see a direct benefit, and even then, they must understand the rationale and believe it. Additionally, they often divert the conversation to how wealthier individuals should be responsible for funding. We need government much more than people realize in order to prioritize these essential services. Managing it poorly is far better than not managing it at all. People hold these opinions because they take many comforts for granted without recognizing it. Story 20. We already know how. There was a small town somewhere in America that completely descended into chaos. They had no services. No trash collection, no fire department, no water treatment, nothing. It wasn't long before the trash piled up. All water had to be boiled. Anything that caught fire was destroyed, and bears roamed the streets. Story 21. It wouldn't. If all forms of government were suddenly abandoned, someone else would quickly take charge. Story 22. Afghanistan. A group of people is breaking into small communities with no national unifying goal. There is a constant state of war. It resembles a scenario from a post-apocalyptic series. Story 23. Great question. I'm not the person you asked, and I don't know any answers apart from this. For the love of crisps, we can do much better. Story 24. Not at all. Governments would rise up like mushrooms, as humans are social animals. They would begin to build a new society, likely with the strongest individual leading them. At that point, they would have a government again. Even a tribal chief represents a form of government. The only humans who would not need a government are hermits. Story 25. Anarchism is a complex ideology with diverse traditions that cannot be summed up in one post. There have been several short-lived attempts at creating an anarchist society. Currently, Rojava, the Kurdish region of Syria, is the closest society on the planet to that idea. The Zapatistas in Mexico are another example. A frequently cited case is Spain during the Spanish Civil War, where the Confederación Nacional del Trabajo and the Federación Anarquista Ibérica were influential anarchist unions in the Republican regions. At its core, anarchists believe that there should not be institutions with unjustified authority. The use of coercion should generally be constrained, and organization should be as bottom-up as possible. Many people conflate anarchy with disorder, but this is a misunderstanding of the ideology. Anarchists must be more organized to make decisions in a bottom-up fashion. Coercion is a tool used by the powerful to relegate the concerns of the less powerful. If everyone has a say, society should have more capacity, not less. Anarchists tend to envision a world where control of everything is democratic: your workplace, your apartment building, your local institutions. Anyone who wants to engage and organize is free to do so. Libertarian municipalists imagine a world where these self-organized building blocks contribute to what could be called a municipal administration, and then these municipalities form agreements and frameworks to collaborate with each other. Story 26. Oh, get real. People can't even put their carts back in the cart corral at the grocery store. How do they think anyone can self-regulate enough to govern themselves? Story 27. By forming unions and cooperative social relationships from the bottom up and eventually dissolving an unnecessary government, a significant movement emerged in Spain in the 1930s. However, many governments of the time, both authoritarian and democratic, united to suppress the Spanish movement, fearing that it could spread and ultimately undermine their power. Story 28. Listen, we have to get things back to the people. People, by and large, are pretty good. At the town level, we could all meet in the biggest church or maybe the high school. We can talk about things affecting the community and make decisions together. As towns get bigger and it becomes less convenient for everyone to gather to discuss every decision, we could allow some people to represent others. Instead of me showing up, I can talk to Charlie, we work out what we think, and then Charlie goes to the meeting. He collaborates with everyone else to determine what people want, and everyone does that. People. If not everyone can agree, we can hold votes. I could let Charlie vote for me because we talked about what we wanted. As the city grows, maybe more people will communicate with their friends, so not everyone has to go to the high school every week. With a smaller group working through issues, they will become more familiar with how the town operates. But still, people working out matters among themselves. There might be some issues we don't want decided at just the town level. For instance, if there is a river and one town tries to dam it, that might not be good for the towns downstream. If a town upstream decides to dam the river, there are definitely some issues where we need to make fair agreements. Just like I talked with Charlie, and he represents me, maybe our town sends someone to discuss what to do with rivers and who is permitted to use or divert water from them. The key is, it is about people and individuals who represent the community, talking and working things out. Not corrupt politicians. People just working things out together. Story 29. I see dead people. A lot of dead people. But then the survivors could start again. Maybe they will do better. Story 30. It wouldn't last long. The only way it works is if, hopefully, one day humans evolve into peaceful beings who believe that love is the answer. Until then, it will be barbaric. Story 31. It wouldn't work. Society requires morality to function, and most people need someone enforcing a moral code to keep them in line. Before the establishment of governments, we created religion as a higher power. Now that governments are more reliable, people are increasingly turning to atheism. Story 32. The same way it functions today, but the people would have less perceived oversight. Additionally, it could potentially eliminate Congress. The legal system would become problematic quickly, and we would require states to take on more responsibilities overall. Let's proceed and see what happens. Story 33. Brutally and poorly, it eventually formed governments again. Anarchy, capitalism, oligarchy, etc. This is the natural cycle of human societies. Story 34. Necessary structures would still exist. They would just develop organically rather than being created by those with the most capital supported by state-sanctioned violence. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.